Last week, we replayed my most listened to episode since we launched this podcast in November of 2021. Now, to officially close out 2024, we are going to replay the most popular episode from this past year. I was actually a little surprised to see that the episode that had the most listens was one geared for children between the ages of 3 and 10 years old. It was my episode called Sleep to Get By or Sleep to Thrive, Sleep for 3 to 10-year-olds. I loved this episode where I explained the difference between determining how much sleep your child needs to thrive versus to just be fine and get by. I also shared how last winter I accidentally shifted Ainsley away from thriving to just getting by without even realizing it initially. It was a really good learning moment for me as a parent. If you realize you are wrapping up 2024 with a child who has drifted into the get by state and maybe is not thriving, I hope this episode helps you decide how you're going to shift to thriving in 2025. After releasing episode 107 that was all about how much sleep I think is optimal for babies and toddlers, I received a lot of questions about how much sleep is optimal for, quote, older children. In fact, we get a lot of requests for episodes related to sleep for children who are 5 and up, so I'm excited to dive into this today. Also, lately I've worked with many families who have seen major transformations with their children after we increase the amount of sleep that their young child is getting each night. So today, I want to help you understand the difference between the amount of sleep your child needs to get by and be fine versus the amount of sleep they need to truly thrive. If you have a child between 3 and 10 years old, this episode is for you. And be sure to check out the show notes for the link I'm going to share that will allow you to grab the free download I created to go along and support you with this episode. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of 2. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children between the age of 3 and 5 years old get 10 to 13 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, and that children between the age of 6 and 10 years old get 9 to 12 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. These are big ranges. And I would argue that for a lot of children, they can get by on the lower end of those ranges, but they will thrive on the higher end of those ranges. So let me elaborate. Let's divide this into 2 groups for this conversation. We're going to stick with that range that they're talking about, the 3 to 5-year-old group, and then the 6 to 10-year-old group. When I work with kids who are in the age range of 3 to 5 years old, I like to target 11 to 13 hours of total sleep in a 24-hour period versus the 10 to 13 recommended. A child between 3 and 5 years old may still be napping, or they may have dropped the nap. For a child who is still napping, I target 10.5 to 12 hours of sleep at night and an hour to an hour and a half nap. For a child who is no longer napping, I target 11 plus hours of sleep at night. Now, I suspect that you know children who do not get this much sleep, and they may appear to be struggling, hello, three-nagers, or they may appear to be just fine. But I always like to figure out if they are getting the amount of sleep that allows them to truly thrive. Sleep is so incredibly powerful, and I think we've made big strides in the last decade, particularly the last 5 years, about understanding what a critical role sleep plays in our health and well-being. And as it relates to children, studies clearly show that getting the optimal amount of sleep improves a child's impulse control, emotional regulation, and learning retention. What parent doesn't want their child to thrive in these 3 areas? So for this age group, I think monitoring impulse control and emotional regulation can really help us know if our children are getting enough sleep to thrive. If, for example, you're getting reports from school that your child is hitting, biting, or struggling to follow instructions, it's definitely possible that they could benefit from more sleep, which would then allow them to have improved impulse control, therefore less hitting, less biting, more following instructions. If you have a child who is very emotional or throwing a lot of tantrums, sure, this is age appropriate. Children between the age of 3 and 5 are going to have big feelings and they are going to throw some tantrums. But it's also very possible that they could benefit from more sleep. That with more sleep, the emotions would be a little less intense. There would be fewer tantrums. If you have a child in this age group who is struggling with particularly intense separation anxiety or just anxiety in general, more sleep can help. Just think about it. If you're someone who's experienced anxiety, I am one of those people. If you get overtired, the anxiety increases. And I have to remind myself all the time when I'm having a very anxious moment or period or day, I have to usually remind myself, this is because we just went on a big exhausting trip, or you stayed up really late, or you started your day at 4 a.m. And it's easy for me to do. Actually, I wouldn't say it's easy. It's something that I've taught myself to do, but it's not a skill that our young kids have. And sleep can really help reduce the intensity of separation anxiety and just general anxiety. And another big area that's starting to get some more attention that I'm really pleased about is diagnosing children with ADHD. If it's been suggested to you or you suspect your child may have ADHD, but they aren't getting at least 11 hours of sleep in that 24-hour period, you may want to consider exploring getting them more sleep prior to doing any testing. I cannot tell you how many times I work with a family who has a child in this 3 to 5 year old age range, even older. This would actually be true for the next age range too, 6 to 10 years old. But they have a child who has been told they have some symptoms of ADHD or a lot of symptoms of ADHD. And then once we get them sleeping more, they see a huge improvement in their child's behavior. And in addition to the parents noticing improved behavior at home, teachers are often reporting that the child is happier and more cooperative at school. I have parents who report back that their child who has been in occupational therapy is now seeing huge strides after we improve their sleep. I have pediatricians who refer parents to me prior to starting occupational therapy or getting ADHD testing. And after we improve sleep, the parents decide that no additional assistance or testing is necessary. These reports make me so happy because it means that these little kiddos are now thriving at school and at home. This does not mean that these children have perfect behavior. No one does. But it does mean that it's easier for them to move through the world as they learn and grow. And this also doesn't mean that children don't need occupational therapy or don't have ADHD. But for those families who move ahead with testing or therapy, it means that they are getting more accurate results that aren't muddied by lack of sleep. And I think it's worth noting that sometimes there can be very noticeable changes in a child's behavior because they were maybe just 30 minutes short on the amount of sleep they needed to thrive, to shift from getting by to thriving. And other times, it could be that they were 2+ hours short. So each child and situation is certainly unique in how much sleep they're going to need to shift from getting by to thriving. And I know some people listening right now are feeling very skeptical about the idea that their child could actually get more sleep. You may feel like bedtime is already a struggle, or your child is full of energy at bedtime or in the evening, and they certainly don't seem tired, or they take forever to fall asleep at night. So how the heck are we going to get them more sleep? I want to caution you against taking that behavior that you're clearly seeing and experiencing to mean that your child wouldn't benefit from more sleep. There are a lot of factors that play into setting your child up for smooth bedtime and sleep readiness. If you're needing to wake your child in the morning and or they are struggling with their behavior, chances are more sleep could shift them from getting by to thriving, and it is possible. If you're interested in learning more about how you can help your 3 to 5-year-old get more sleep, we can always connect for a free 15-minute Get Acquainted call, or you can check out my free class, 3 Steps to a Successful Sleep Reset with a 2.5 to 6-year-old. I'll include links to both of those in the show notes. Now, let's talk about the 5 to 10-year-old group. This group is fresh because I have a 9 and 11-year-old, so it's an area that is alive and well in my household. In comparison to the AAP recommendation of 9 to 12 hours of sleep at night, I like to target 10.5 to 12 hours of sleep each night. In addition to improved impulse control and emotional regulation, I am personally blown away by how much getting an optimal amount of sleep can improve learning retention. And I'm going to share a personal story with you in a minute. It's really important to understand that sleep before and after learning is critical. Your child needs sleep before they learn new things in order for the brain to soak up the most information, like a sponge. And they need sleep after learning new things in order to hit the save button on what they learned. Not too long before my oldest started kindergarten, I watched a very powerful talk that Matt Walker gave at Google on how sleep affects learning. I'm going to link to it in the show notes, and I strongly encourage you to watch it. This talk really reinforced my desire to keep sleep a priority for my children as they entered elementary school and as we entered a different season where we had a lot of evening activities. And in recent years, I've come to absolutely believe that a huge reason my children do quite well in school is not because they study, but rather because they get a lot of sleep. My kids have entered the season of life where they have sports practices that end later, particularly in the winter with basketball. So they are not getting the perfect amount of sleep every single night because they have sports most nights and we have homework. But on an ideal night, my youngest, who is in this range, she's 9.5 years old, will sleep from 7:30 p.m. to 6:30 or 7 a.m. That's 11 to 11.5 hours. That is her range for thriving. In addition to getting my girls to bed on time and as often and consistently as we can during the week, we also don't do later bedtimes on the weekends. I think this is big, you guys. This is so different from how I grew up. So I grew up with still too late of a bedtime, but there was a time to go to bed during the week, and then there were the weekends where you stayed up later. And the research is clear that is not good for any of us. Of course, there are sometimes special events or reasons that we do let them stay up later, but it's not our typical practice. This allows them to refuel, to stay on their optimal circadian rhythm, and to go into a new week at the top of their game. Over the last few years, I've really started to suspect that sleep has been critical for my children performing well in school. Of course, I like to think that they are bright, but when I'm chatting with other parents at birthday parties and events, I often hear about the significant amount of studying that children are needing to do, and tutors that parents are feeling are necessary in order to help their children grasp what they're being taught in school. And so while I think my kids are bright, it's kind of made me wonder why they don't rarely need to study. They, of course, spend time in the evening doing their homework, and occasionally there are some things that do require studying. For example, the one that's fresh in my head is learning all the states and capitals and how to correctly spell them all. That was not going to be something that was just going to be retained from sitting in the classroom. But when it comes to things that they're learning in the classroom, neither of my girls really study for tests. And for the most part, they get straight A's. And I also know from chatting with other parents and from what I hear from my kids about other kids in the class, because guess what? Kids love to talk about what time they go to bed. My kids are getting a lot more sleep than their peers. This is sometimes a sore spot because they'll want to say, well, so-and-so doesn't have to go to bed until 10 o'clock. And so they're trying to use it against me. But I have suspected that their sleep is one of the reasons that they're having academic success without having to do a lot of extra studying. And this is pretty important because when we have these jam-packed evenings, needing to do a lot of extra studying, of course, is going to bump their bedtimes out. But I haven't really had a way to test out if what I've been thinking is true until recently. And I want to share how this little unintentional experiment happened and I would say proved my suspicions to be true. So this likely won't surprise any of you, but I have not been the parent that has taken my kids to a lot of evening events, particularly during the school week. So despite the fact that I am a huge UVA basketball fan, or I guess sports fan in general, and we are lucky enough to live in Charlottesville and have since before we had our kids, we haven't really been going to any night games since we had our girls. Well, this year, I got a little bee in my bonnet and I decided that I was going rogue. Both of my girls play basketball and they are older and they're super fun to take to the games. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've done this for over a decade of giving up going to these sporting events. And I have all these amazing memories of growing up in a college town myself and going to basketball games with my dad. And I thought, we're doing it. This is the year. We are diving in and we're going to as many home games as we possibly can. And I went all out. I started going to both the women and the men's games with the girls, and we were having a grand old time. And then I noticed that my 9-year-old's grades started to slip. She went from getting mostly A pluses to getting B's, B minuses. And at first I really didn't think much of it because, hello, it's third grade and I don't really harp on my kids about school. And I don't think straight A's is mission critical in third grade. But after a couple weeks of seeing these consistent B's versus the consistent A's we had been seeing, I started to become curious. I actually asked her, because she's my very thoughtful child, if she knew why she was suddenly getting more B's. I asked her if school was feeling particularly harder or more challenging. She said no, and she didn't know why she was getting B's. And I told her that after thinking about it, I suspected that it was because I was taking her to too many nighttime basketball games, in addition to it being basketball season for her, where she also had a practice that ended basically at her bedtime. So she had that weekly, and then we were tacking on typically a game or two in that week as well. So this meant that typically 2 nights a week, she was getting less than her optimal amount of sleep. In fact, typically on basketball night, she was getting 2 hours less, because by the time we got home from a basketball game, she was going to bed at like 9:30 versus her 7:30. I told her that what that could mean is that her brain wasn't remembering everything that she learned in school, which would be why she was now getting basically a grade and a half lower score on her tests and quizzes. I proposed that we take a break from going to the UVA games, or that she take a break. I'll be honest, I kept going. And that we would then test out to see what would happen with her grades. Now, I would not propose this to all kids, but she actually is the child who I suspected would take me up on this offer. A lot of times I say we guide our children to more sleep. We aren't actually asking them if they want more sleep. But I know her well, and she was also curious, and she agreed. So we changed nothing else other than getting her to bed on time, except for the night she had basketball practice. And wouldn't you know, within about a week, she went back to getting A's again. And we didn't change anything else other than cutting out those games that made it so she went to bed at 9:30. Even though I had suspected sleep was playing a role in her academic performance, and the research is very clear that sleep greatly affects learning retention, this absolutely amazed me. Was she getting by when she was getting 2 hours less sleep on those nights that we went to games? Yes, she totally was. She did not appear to be visibly struggling. But was she thriving and able to be her very best little self? Apparently not. Now I know that she really does thrive and is able to take on maximum learning with 11 plus hours of sleep at night. Now, just to be clear, this does not mean my kids don't ever stay up or won't ever stay up. In fact, on the day I'm recording this, I plan to be taking them to a 7 p.m. UVA women's basketball game because we are so excited that our Who's are hosting a tournament game at home. But what this unintentional experiment did was remind me that I want to be more thoughtful about how often I do these things with my younger daughter in particular, because her circadian rhythm hasn't yet shifted. For those who don't know this, that shift in circadian rhythm starts to happen when children enter early puberty, which typically happens somewhere between 10 and 11 years old. That's a topic for another day. So until then, I need to protect that early bedtime for her a little bit more than I did this year when I went rogue. But gosh, we did have fun, and there's nothing wrong with a few B's. But as my girls grow and have even more evening activities, homework, and tests that are going to truly need to be studied for, I am going to do my very best to help them understand the power of sleep. I mean, gosh, if I could turn back time and change how I balanced studying versus sleep in high school and in college, oh, I wish I could. I wish I could see how different my experience would be. How much less stress I would have felt about how hard it was. I was always the kid who had to study really hard. And I'm also always the person who needs a fair amount of sleep. And we even knew that as a kid. I was always the kid who got sick after a sleepover and just generally kind of struggled with my overall happiness when I was overtired. And I wish I could turn back time and change how I balanced studying versus sleep. And so I want to help my girls as they get older, when I won't be able to micromanage them, find that balance between studying and sleep so they can maximize their learning and make it as easy as possible. I was a nerd, but I worked hard to be a nerd. I don't think all the academic success I had ever felt easy. I was not one of those kids. And so I do think, gosh, what if I had gotten more sleep? Maybe it would have felt a little bit easier. And so I'm using these moments now of what happened this winter with my kids and me going rogue and getting all excited about basketball and enjoying that with my kids. I'm taking those moments to try to teach my kids the effects of these decisions. Doesn't mean we won't do them, but I think it's important to teach our kids that along the way so that when I'm not micromanaging them, they may make some of these decisions on their own and decide what's worth it or how much is too much so that learning is easier for them. Okay, I've created a download for you that includes my tips that can help you figure out how much sleep is going to help your child thrive. I'll share the link to access that download in the show notes. The amount of sleep that will allow each child to thrive is absolutely going to be different and unique. My hope is that if you're not sure if you've hit the mark just yet, that this episode will make you curious to test out if more sleep would help your child shift from maybe just getting by and being a happy little kiddo or a struggling child to a child who's thriving. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope you'll come back again next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.